let's start with the big story that we're tracking this morning, where the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has secured a resounding mandate in the general elections that were held on Sunday, according to the exit polls. Now, after his resounding victory, Abe has said that he will firmly deal with threats from North Korea. Now, the local media has said that Abe's Liberal Democratic Party-led coalition had won 312 seats in a House of 465, thus allowing it to retain its two-thirds super majority. The win will bolster his ambition to revise Japan's post-war pacifist constitution. It also means that his Abenomics growth strategy, which is centered on hyper-easy monetary policy, will continue.
今回ですね、私たちは北朝鮮の脅威にいかに対応していくか、いかに国民を守り抜くのか、そして少子高齢化をいかに乗り越えて子どもたちと日本の未来を切り裂いていくのかということについて集中的にお話をさせていただきました。つまり私は我々に対してまだ厳しい目線が注がれているということをですね、改めて認識をしたところでございますが。
The leader of the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, an opposition party in Japan, has also reacted to Abe's win. Let's listen in to that reaction.
私の想像以上に多くの国民の皆さんがこれまでの政治というものの全体に、国民から遠いと、自分たちからかけ離れたところで、何かやっているという、そういう意識を強く持たれていたんではないかと。いうことを痛感をいたしています。特に現状民進党がどうされるのかということが、おそらく一種の現在進行形なんだと思いますし、そこから遠離れて作った我々の立場から考えると、少なくともその状況がどうなるのかということが結論出るまでは、そことは対しては見守りたい。
So it is a resounding majority which Shinzo Abe has got, although some will say that it is a resounding one, but still a truncated one, because Shinzo Abe did not get the kind of majority that he wanted. Still, it is a two-thirds majority. What does this imply, and what will Shinzo Abe actually go on and do with this majority that's been given to him, this mandate that he's got from the snap polls? To discuss more on this, we are joined in our studios by Padma Rao, who is our senior international affairs editor, and we're also joined by Mr. Vishnu Prakash, who is the former High Commissioner of India to Canada and ambassador to Seoul, and also the official spokesperson of the MEA. He's been there. So let me start with you, Mr. Vishnu Prakash. You know, this is a resounding majority. This was, of course, a snap poll that had been called by Shinzo Abe on the 25th of September, where he said that he needed a new mandate to deal with this threat from North Korea. How much of an impact do you think this is going to have in terms of how Shinzo Abe now deals with North Korea?
Well, it is remarkable that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's led LDP or and New Komeito together are likely to get a two-third majority once again. He has been in power for 5 years, and in Japan, it has been a revolving door prime ministership. Japan has seen very rapid changes in prime minister's portfolio, and here there is Prime Minister Abe, who is heading to become the longest-serving prime minister in post-World War Japan.
Absolutely.
So, and also it's remarkable given the fact that in July 2017, his favorable rating was just about 30%. So, first of all,
right, we seem to have lost that connection there. We'll try and re-establish that connection with Vishnu Prakash. Meanwhile, Padma, if I could come to you on this, it is a resounding majority. It is what Shinzo Abe wanted. He called in a snap poll, although he still had one more year in terms of his tenure. How significant do you think will Shinzo Abe now change his approach towards North Korea?
Well, I think he's been given a breath of, new life. He's been given a reprieve, so to speak, because as our commentators earlier on were pointing on, many Japanese have not been very happy with, with certain elements of his brand of Abenomics, his methods, his three-pronged method to revive the Japanese economy, which has been pretty moribund for a while. Especially since the earthquake. So there has been, kind of a feeling that he's all talk and no action. That will hopefully change, and I think it has to change, because some of the the issues that he's addressing through his Abenomics, the consumers are not spending, there's saving, there's a deep recession, as I said, since the earthquake of 2012, and there's a huge amount of government debt. So he has these three methods, three aims. He wants to ease, there's monetary easing, he wants a more robust fiscal reform, and also he intends to boost private investment, all three of which are urgently needed. But it remains to be seen how many of, when he actually starts executing Abenomics, how many of these measures, because some of them are certainly very unpopular, like raising taxation or, lifting visa restrictions on foreigners to come into Japan to live and work there. These may not go down very well with Japanese society, which is essentially a conservative society, an inward-looking society. So, yes, on the one hand, the Japanese voters want to see action, but on the other hand, will they be able to absorb these actions, even the unpopular
Will they be able
ones?
to absorb these actions? Now, but one of the fundamental and key issues, Padma, which Shinzo Abe wishes to address with this snap poll, is that he wanted to revisit Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, essentially to amend the Japanese Constitution, which is seen as a pacifist constitution. Japan, by Article 9, which was actually inserted by the Americans after the Second World War, is not allowed to have a strong army of its own. And this is what Shinzo Abe wishes to change.
Well, Article 9 has essentially been reinterpreted, or quietly reinterpreted, by the Japanese themselves over all these years as reading that Japan is certainly allowed to have an army for self-defense. Now, of course, that definition has to be extended to, because what is self-defense when you live in a neighborhood like North Korea, which has flown missiles over Japanese territory and which has been, threatening Japan to sink all of Japan into the sea, and, various such threats emanating from Pyongyang. So, and also there is the threat of China, which is also on an expansionist drive in in the South China Sea, as well as in the Indian Ocean, indeed. So these are two real-time issues which need redressal, and I think the feeling is that, and also, of course, there is also this growing national consciousness, Salih, as we were saying, all over the world, indeed, and I think Japan has not been immune to that either. And the reason for this is, of course, the greater global threats are, the more there is a national consciousness on the rise in various societies in various countries around the world. Japan is certainly one of them.
We'll just discuss that a bit in just one. Meanwhile, I'm told that we have Mr. Vishnu Prakash back with us. Mr. Prakash, this is in many ways a snap poll which Shinzo Abe called. He said essentially to deal with the threat from North Korea. Japan wants to revisit its pacifist constitution. They want to bring about changes in Article 9. How much of an impact do you think this will have in that region? Will this, let's put it this way, will Japan ramp up its military after this election?
There is no reason why Japan should not be a normal country. The pacifist constitution was imposed on Japan after the Second World War. And Japan has since come a long way. It's an ally of the USA, and it lives in it is located in a very difficult neighborhood. Padma had alluded to the fact that there are issues, there are serious provocations from North Korea. Japan has been challenged by China frequently. Chinese naval probes have been around the Senkaku Island. And Japan has to be able to defend itself. Japan has to be able to work with its allies. And let me recall that, Japan has been embarrassed time and again. In 1991, during the Iraq War, Japan shelled out, 1991, 26 years ago, Japan shelled out $13 billion towards the war kitty. And yet it was criticized. It was criticized as engaging in checkbook diplomacy, and it is stymied. It was not allowed till 2015 to work with its allies, and it has been gradually chipping away at those restrictions, and rightly so. It has been kind of reinterpreting the constitution, but it's about time that the constitution should be amended. It will be it will be interestingly the first ever amendment of the post-war constitution of Japan, which entails, it's a long process. It requires a 2/3 majority of both houses and a simple majority through referendum. So we are looking at the next 2-3 years before which, by the time in which the Article 9 will be amended. And therefore, Prime Minister Abe needed a fresh mandate, and this takes him right up to 2021.
Absolutely.
And hopefully, he will be able to do what he wants to do. That is one. Secondly, he also wants to now fire the third arrow from the quiver in terms of Abenomics, because Japanese economy has been sluggish since 1989, but the efforts of Prime Minister Abe are paying off. Stock market is a 20-year high. The unemployment rate is at one of the lowest in the last 20 years. And exports are increasing. But Japan faces challenges. So therefore, Prime Minister Abe would like to have democratization of the boardrooms in Japan. He would like to change labor laws. He would want to bring more women in the workforce. He would like to change immigration laws. And bring in some long-term structural reforms so that Japanese economy can again be on a sound footing. And the third aspect that he needs to deal with is nuclear power.
Right.
So he has a full slate of issues, and important issues at that, which he needs to deal with. And therefore, this mandate, the 2/3 majority that he's getting, will enable him to silence his critics and go full steam ahead. Although I must say that he will face a lot of opposition, there will be a lot of heavy lifting to be done. But given his experience, given his tenacity, and given his confident approach to things, I'm quite optimistic that Japan will be able to surge ahead.
Absolutely. So, Vishnu Prakash Desi is very optimistic. Padma, you had a question.
Right. Good morning, Vishnu. This is Padma
Good morning,
in
Padma.
the studio. Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to talk to you.
Good to have you on our show. Vishnu, you mentioned, interestingly, the very issues that have been prickly issues in Japan. For instance, the whole issue of nuclear power, to have it or not, nuclear energy for military purposes or otherwise. And the other issue has been, to whether Japan is entitled to having its own army. Now, as far as the India-Japan relations are concerned, we are aware that Japan faces China's expansionism in the South China Sea, and India faces some of it in the Indian Ocean region. It hasn't reached, a military confrontation yet, and we certainly hope it never will. But there has been cooperation between the Japanese Navy and the Indian Navy in the Malabar naval exercises in 2007 and then again 14. And, the United States has also dipped in and out of those.
And again this year.
And again this year. And the United States has dipped in and out of those exercises. Now, to what extent, if this Article 9 is changed, is that, sort of more an inward-looking, will that be an inward-looking move, more intended for the immediate protection of Japan, because as you pointed out, it lives in a sort of volatile neighborhood, or will there also be heightened military cooperation or greater willingness for Japan to work along with other countries, specifically India?
I think that's a very pertinent observation, and in my view, it will be both. One, Japan will be unshackled or unfettered. And today, the Japanese self-defense force is stymied because it cannot fire the first bullet, it cannot engage in combat, it cannot engage in surgical strikes or preemptive strikes. So, which is a right of any nation. If you have an imminent threat, you don't want to wait till that threat is executed and then respond. So, on the one hand, it will enable Japan to, as I said, to be a normal country, to take whatever action that it needs to take to enhance the security and defense of Japan. Secondly, in this world which is an interconnected world, allies have to work together, friends have to work together. And in 2015, Japan did manage to allow some kind of a collective self-defense. But Japan is a very important democracy. It's the third largest economy in the world. And there is no reason why countries like India, Japan, Australia, Indonesia, USA, Vietnam cannot work together to enhance peace and security in the region and beyond. And the amendment of Article 19 will enable Japan to do just that, to play its rightful role as a responsible member of the international community to enhance peace and security in the region and beyond.
Absolutely, indeed. Also, Mr. Prakash, if I could just probe this a little bit further. One of the reasons as to why Japan perhaps would be feeling insecure is because Donald Trump, in recent months, he has indicated that perhaps the United States should be more inward-looking. He does not have the same faith like the earlier US presidents did, like, for instance, in, NATO. And is that, do you think, one of the reasons as to why Japan would like to bolster its own army to put up some kind of self-defense in a very volatile neighborhood that it actually lives in?
Well, absolutely right. It goes without saying that primarily every nation is responsible for its own security. While others may offer you umbrellas or security alliances or treaties, the buck stops at the table of the Prime Minister or the President of a country which is concerned. So that is one. Secondly, under President Trump, not just Japan, but practically every ally, whether it is NATO, whether it is Korea, whether it is Japan, is no longer that certain about, or there is a bit of unpredictability about the responses of USA. A, the ability of USA in the last 10 years to function as a security guarantor in the region, and B, Mr. Trump's own personality. As you said, he's more inward looking. So these are also very valid concerns, and certainly Japan needs to bolster its security. South Korea, for example, is already reviewing its position, and the defense minister of South Korea recently told the parliament that he had requested USA to bring back tactical weapons on the Korean soil. So same about NATO. And look, there is the extent of unpredictability goes to the Iran deal, which was negotiated with great amount of difficulty, and there is uncertainty now about its continuation. So we do live in uncertain times.
Absolutely.
And it is accentuated by the approach of President Trump, and Japan is rightly concerned, cannot leave its security concerns hanging in midair, and it needs to do what it needs to do to ensure the security and defense of Japan.
Absolutely, indeed. So it is essentially a revisiting of the post-World War II alliances, where immediately after the Second World War, America had in fact guaranteed that if Japan will not pursue its defense, then it will of course be guaranteeing its military stability. Meanwhile, Padma, you had a question.
Yes, I was interested in learning Vishnu's views about the nuclear issue, Vishnu. The Japanese have been extremely sensitive about nuclear energy, as we mentioned earlier. But there has been a strategic relationship growing quite rapidly between India and Japan. We've had, during Prime Minister Modi's second visit, the deal on nuclear energy was signed. This was held up initially for 6 years, and this is the first such deal signed by Tokyo with a country that is not a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Japan is going to provide nuclear reactors, as you know, fuel technology, and we are going to build 6 reactors near New Delhi with that aid and with that assistance. Now, is this restricted? Is this enthusiasm for the Japanese government, specifically that of Mr. Abe, restricted only to nuclear exports and nuclear dealings with the global community? Because from what I glean from commentators in Japan, that one of the main planks for the opposition parties, which didn't do very well, but nonetheless has been Japan's aversion to nuclear energy, and apparently that still goes down very well with the Japanese voter.
Well, absolutely right. There are two aspects of it. One, the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement between Japan and India is a testimony to India-Japan relations, but also to India's credentials as a peace-loving country, as a country which has an impeccable track record, and has now, it needs energy security, and civil nuclear energy is one of the facets of energy security, and that in recognition of that, first USA and then other countries and Japan has signed the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement with India. So it is a testimony both to India-Japan relations as well as India. That is one. Secondly, the Fukushima incident was in some ways a game changer. Japan has been a very active user of civil nuclear energy. So has France, so has Korea, and now some other countries, including China, are looking at and boosting the civil nuclear energy mix. But post-Fukushima, there have been questions. And those have in some ways dimmed the enthusiasm for nuclear energy, including, I would say, in India. And those questions are still unanswered. How far should be a reactor from the populated areas? What would be the kind of security and safeguards that can be introduced? There still are no clear answers. So Japan is ambivalent about continuation of its own nuclear reactors, and there is a strong opposition within Japan to restarting the reactors. But Japan certainly it's a technological rich country. It has got state-of-the-art reactors, state-of-the-art civil nuclear technology. And while the debate will go on whether or not, or to what extent to enhance the civil nuclear energy mix in the energy basket, this does enable us, as and when we choose, to expand or to cooperate with Japan to set up more nuclear power reactors in India.
Absolutely. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed to both our guests, Padma Rao and also to Vishnu Prakash, for joining us in this special discussion. In many ways, Abe's return, of course, makes the entire region extremely interesting. For India, however, it marks a continuation of the relationship, the very strong relationship that India has had with Japan. Meanwhile, on the back of the resounding victory which Shinzo Abe has got, Tokyo's benchmark stock index has extended a record-winning streak after Abe's win pushed the yen down and boosted exports. Japan's yen has been at a 3-month low after Abe's poll win, which gave the government a green light for the super easy monetary policy which Abe has been pursuing in the name of Abenomics. The Nikkei futures NKC 1 also pointed to opening gains of around 1% for the Japanese shares after Prime Minister Abe looked to have easily won in the national elections, and this after investors assumed the victory will allow the Bank of Japan to continue with a massive monetary easing that depresses bond yields and the yen, while the US Federal Reserve seems determined to hike rates again later on in December.